Hi, George.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I am pretty good. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright. This is the Wright Show. You are George Johnson, familiar to viewers and listeners of Blogging Heads TV as co-star of the science faction show, along with John Horgan. And you may be known even to non-Blogging Heads fans as a very well-known science writer. You've written God knows how many pieces for the New York Times over the years. You've written a number of books. Most recently, I think, the Cancer Chronicles about cancer. You've also written this book some time ago, but as relevant as ever, I think, Fire in the Mind.
Ah, yes. The old hard copy.
Science, Faith, and the Search for Order by George Johnson, which I want to talk about some today. I also want to talk about, as I told you, I want to talk about the meaning of your life. I'm doing kind of a series of conversations on Meaning of Life TV in which I talk to notable people. You certainly qualify there. About where, if anywhere, they find meaning in their lives.
Yeah.
You're a particularly interesting case because you are so immersed in science and scientific knowledge. And of course, science is said to be at odds with one traditional source of meaning for people, religion. And in this book, you tackle some questions about, the limits of scientific knowledge, the weirdness of some modern science, the difficulty that the human mind has really grasping it and what it means, if anything. So I wanted to start out with that, with this issue with some things you talk about in the book, and the issue of kind of the weirdness of some scientific knowledge today. And then as the conversation progresses, get more and more personal and ask you more and more about your life. Unless you want to bail out before we get to the person.
No, I think I can do that.
You think you can handle it?
Yeah, I think that sounds fun.
Okay. Now you're in New Mexico, right?
I am Santa Fe. And that was really the inspiration for writing the book. It just came out, by the way, in 20th anniversary edition.
Really?
With a new preface.
No kidding. Well, that's quite a tribute, and because I noticed it was published in 1995. I couldn't believe how long it had been.
Oh God, that's
now. So who's publishing the 20th anniversary?
It's a vintage paperback. I mean,
oh, good.
It's just a short new preface. Some things happened in 20 years in science, and not too much, but
yeah,
they did find dark energy, and so I had to kind of mention a few of these things because I have a big section in my book where I talk about dark matter and consider to what extent it really exists and to what extent it's a construction to fill a hole in a logical theory.
Right, because the idea now is this the one where we can infer the existence of what should be more mass out there than is actually tangible, discernible.
Yeah.
And that's what we call dark matter.
Well, yeah, I mean, when they say detect, we've detected dark matter, out this way in this galactic cluster, what they really mean is if our theories of gravity are right, stuff out there is behaving in such a way that there must be way more gravity than the normal matter that we can detect. So you go on and say, well, therefore there must be something called dark matter that's invisible, right, and there's just precisely enough of it so that the universe looks the way it does. And the evidence has become pretty overwhelming, but I still have this skeptical bone.
Well, what's the nature of the evidence aside from the fact that the math says there should be more matter than we actually see?
Well, like gravitational lensing. So the idea that big chunks of matter bend space-time, and therefore light being coming to you from a star might be deflected one way or the other by some big invisible chunk of mass. Now that's one way to look at it, through that end of the telescope. You say, we have all these other reasons to believe the star is going to be over here, except it's over there, and therefore there must be therefore we've detected more invisible, undetectable dark matter. Or you could say, maybe there's, something else causing that we don't know,
and that is totally unrelated to the fact that the math doesn't work out on the matter front.
Yeah, there's a few physicists, and the last time I wrote about dark matter about a year ago in my column for the Times, I mentioned some physicists who really don't buy the dark matter idea. There's very, very few. And they believe that we need to make some kind of modification to the theory of gravity. And in my column, I was afraid when I wrote this column by even mentioning them that I would be beleaguered by angry astrophysicists saying, how dare I, question dark matter and bring up this minority view. So I referred to them as mavericks, and then one of them was really, really offended by them.
No, maverick is the polite term. Crank is the other one.
I thought maverick. I told him, to me, I've always kind of liked thinking of myself as a maverick. But
look at Sarah Palin. Come on. There's a lot of great mavericks in the world.
That's the best paragon to aspire to. But yeah, so I just find these things fascinating. And it just, it all comes down to me. To me, it all comes down to this question of how do we know what we know about the world? And how do we know when we're actually finding patterns out there in the world? And how do we know when our brain isn't projecting the patterns like a kind of shadow? Because we're really, really good at that,
Yeah, I've been accused of doing that. Hey, I want to try a thesis out on you that I'm developing. Because I'm giving a series of public lectures in the spring at Union Theological Seminary, where I am visiting professor of science and religion.
Cool.
And one thing I'm going to talk about is that it occurred to me that, since the term agnosticism was coined, I think in 1869 by Thomas Huxley, and it's kind of a profession of intellectual humility in a certain sense. What Huxley said is, it is only in the spirit of science to not confidently assert anything you're not confident of. So if you're going to say there's not a God, you should be sure there's not a God, right? So anyway, I just think of agnosticism basically as the idea that you should be as intellectually humble as the actual state of your knowledge warrants.
Yeah.
And one thing that occurred to me is that in a certain sense, and I mean, maybe you'll take issue with this, but in a certain sense, although scientific knowledge has grown immensely and our comprehension of the universe has grown immensely since Huxley's time, there's a sense in which more intellectual humility is warranted now than before because of all the weird stuff that we hadn't anticipated, right? Like quantum physics. So
and and then it seems like we've just come so close to the edge of what it's probably possible for a human brain to understand, and there's always going to be a limit. We can't, the philosophers talk about the Archimedean point in which you can stand outside the whole universe and see, oh yeah, that's how it works. That's where it stops. This is where it starts. And we can't do that because we're trying to explain something we're part of, and we're trying to explain it from our perspective of this one rock going around one sun, and with brains that basically evolved to keep from being eaten and to eat as many other things as we can. And, why should we think that, we can say that the universe is precisely 13.8 billion light years in radius? And the precision of it just often makes me think.
Well, yeah.
And on the other hand, I'm just so impressed that, we've gone as far as we can. And I just, admire and celebrate this stuff. But, who knows? I mean, we're assuming that we've got the basic picture. Everything's mass, energy, moving in the arena of space-time. Maybe there's some extra ingredient that we don't know about that beings evolving in another part of the universe would have figured out. But
first of all, I think there's consciousness, which I think we don't totally have a grip on. You mentioned that we are part of the thing we're explaining, but I think the deepest manifestation of that is the fact that we are conscious beings, and we don't really know what that means. And consciousness is one of the things you would like to be able to explain in theory, since it seems to be something.
Well, but it's the single most visceral part of our existence. I mean, it's everything is our.
Well, and it's what gives life meaning, right? I mean, if we didn't have subjective experience, it's like, what's the point?
Exactly. Yeah. We'd be the, like the philosophical zombies that do everything that we do, but have no awareness that we're alive. But that, it didn't bother me so much when I was younger. I wrote a lot about artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And, then it was just like, oh, well, once you get a computer, or maybe made from neural networks, electronic neural networks, where you're kind of like simulating brain architecture. At some point, this will reach this like critical complexity, and it'll be just so rich and interconnected that consciousness will emerge. And as you get older and nothing like that really is close to happening, you begin to appreciate how much hand waving there really is, and how we really don't know anything about consciousness and how it would arise from neurons squirting chemicals at each other.
Yeah, I too have gotten a little more taken by the mysteries, the deep mysteries, as I've gotten older. I mean, consciousness, I was actually, I mean, in my book, which you actually happily reviewed for the New York Times before I knew you, Three Scientists and Their Gods in 1988. We met sometime after that, but you generously reviewed it. I got into consciousness and the fact that it seemed, I did a version of the zombie experiment and said, so why do we need consciousness if you can imagine kind of unconscious beings that are as complex as us behaviorally? But at the same time, it's just gotten to seem weirder and weirder to me.
Yeah.
This and related mysteries and kind of the mysteries of quantum physics. Oh, yeah. And I got to say, well, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just saying, that's right. This was all kind of a long way around, and now it connects with quantum physics. And then, a lot of people think that this has some deep connection with consciousness, and a lot of people don't. But again, it's something we don't really understand, except to the point where we have, wonderful mathematics and theories and can predict things with stunning precision. But as far as what it means,
right,
is another thing. The word problem is what one.
Yeah, the problem of conceiving of it.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to say that, well, in quantum physics, there is true randomness, right? Like whether a particle does this or that is truly random. There is no hidden variable. We can't predict it.
Yeah.
And there's no hidden variable, which Einstein thought there was, but quantum physicists today say no, there's no hidden variable. I mean, what that means is that things happen in the physical universe for which there is no cause in the physical universe. Now, if you had said that to Thomas Huxley, he would have said, no, wait, that's supernatural. If things happen in the physical universe for which there's no cause in the physical universe, that's supernatural. That's too weird. But physicists are saying that it happens. They're, of course, not using the word supernatural. And they're assuring us that in the long run, the number of heads equal the number of tails, so we can think of it as randomness. But still, if you ask, well, why did it come out heads this time and not tails? They would say, there is no reason. There is no explanation in the physical universe.
But if you have a whole bunch of similar instances, an ensemble of events,
then it's 50-50 in the long run.
Yeah, then you can predict with great precision how they will how they will distribute themselves in the long run. So that's what makes it not seem supernatural and quite as freaky. But still, I mean, what does it mean? I mean, it's just so different from how the world works at our level of pool sticks and billiard balls and driving cars and things like this. And again, it's just like. You run into plenty of physicists who will say, well, look, the math really works. I mean, obviously, there's something very deeply true here. We make all these predictions that are borne out with stunning precision. And I don't really care what it means, so that I can, explain it to you in a popularization or in a philosophy where you'll go, yeah, I really totally get it. And then others, end up spending the latter part of their careers agonizing over this and coming up with all kinds of interestingly strange ideas, like John Wheeler and It from Bit.
The idea of that information is more fundamental than physical stuff per se? Is that the idea of It from Bit?
Part of it, and that each one of these quantum measurements is basically taking pure potentiality of some sort and then locking it into, something that actually has substance and manifests itself. So it's sort of like we're, like every measurement we take or question we ask just sort of jogs the universe along this path. And
that's interesting. The idea that kind of interrogating the universe or inquiring about it brings it into more finite shape.
Yeah, but of course then then there's the people that say that there has to be an ensemble of parallel paths in which the universe could have unfolded in every other possible way. And then all these
you mean the many worlds, the
many worlds thing. And then you have some of the physicists saying, well, these other many worlds are just kind of hypothetical, and like Murray Gell-Mann, the physicist, preferred to call them many histories, many possible histories. And then there's other people who really look at them as each having, an equivalent ontological reality.
Right. In other words, there is a world where you and I exist and are doing different things than we're doing now. I mean, some people take it that literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, physicists, serious guys.
I mean, there's actually plenty of physicists who believe that's the one interpretation that requires the least arbitrary belief. So, for example, you can. I mean, to me, I never quite get it, because I don't mind at all the idea of the universe and the path we take through it as being a series of random flukes, and I'm perfectly happy with that. But
It certainly seems that way.
But it does all the time. But if you want to expunge the randomness and make it completely deterministic, it seems like the best way to do that is to assume the many worlds theory. But to me, that's kind of a
now, wasn't this quickly? By the way, let me just throw in that we talked about consciousness, quantum physics. One connection of quantum physics that's asserted to consciousness that's asserted by some is on this business of measurement, bringing in, forcing the wave function to collapse.
Yeah.
And bringing a reality at the level of, say, the electron into definite being.
Yeah.
Some people think. I think most people these days think it's just interaction with a macroscopic measuring device that does it. But there have always been some people who think, no, it's the conscious observer who's monitoring the measuring device. So consciousness is bringing things into definite physical reality. That's pretty weird.
Yeah, Wheeler and I think John von Neumann.
Did they both buy that?
Well, it's kind of the it from bit thing, with Wheeler.
I guess that's right. So
it's I mean, you had people, like Niels Bohr in the Copenhagen interpretation, and I think the basic idea was all we can really talk about. It was very positivist explanation. All we can really do is talk about what our instruments measure and what we see, and then build our theories on that. And I think when he took it another level, he'd say, there's no reason to think that our brains are going to be able to understand this basic reality that's so far removed from our everyday experience. And let's just accept that it's, really, really weird. And then you had the people saying, well, this whole thing where you take the measurement and the electron's suddenly here and not there. And they call this, collapse of the wave function. And as you said, there's people who say, well, it has to be a conscious observer to do that. The whole thing with Schrodinger's cat, where you have some mechanism like a glass vial of poison, and there's a 50-50 chance that it breaks, and you won't know whether the cat's dead or alive till you open the box. So, and then the argument that the cat's in a superposition of dead and alive until you open the box. And I think most people think that's kind of nonsense now, and that things are measured just by the fact that there's other particles in the universe that you're like bumping around against. So the cats could be bumping.
Yeah, but then why is it that when you do things like the two-slit experiment, you do conclude that there was this period of time when apparently there wasn't enough bumping around going on for things to come into definite shape?
Yeah.
Right?
And especially, I mean, when you're thinking of electrons as being particles, and then you do the two-slit experiment, and the electron seems to go through both slits at the same time, or maybe 78% through this slit at the same time it's going 32% through the other slit. But it's a little less spooky if you think of it as a wave, and then it's just like, wave diffraction. But it's still...
Yeah, but then the question is, and let me just say, there's a really good chapter on this in this book. Fire in the Mind. I just dipped into it today, where you get into this whole thing.
I used to understand it a lot better than I do now.
Well, then maybe people should go back and read the version of you that understood it super clearly, because this really is good, and I mean it really is. And
one of my favorite chapters.
Yeah, it's called The Undetermined World. This chapter, and I think let me try to find a quote that kind of speaks to this. Well, first of all, there's some good quotes from Heisenberg and Niels Bohr, I guess the kind of the authors of the Copenhagen interpretation, right?
Yeah.
Heisenberg says what we learn about is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning.
Yeah. Put it well.
There's one here. Here's one. Heisenberg says we must be clear that when it comes to atoms, language can only be used as in poetry. The poet, too, is not nearly so concerned with describing facts as with creating images and establishing mental connections. Heisenberg replies, then, how can we ever hope to understand atoms? And Bohr says, I think we may yet be able to do so, but in the process, we may have to learn what the word understanding really means. There's some good stuff, and then there's
they had these great conversations, that are in books. These long dialogues between Bohr and Heisenberg and Einstein. Physics and Philosophy is one, and Physics and really good books.
Right.
It was just so great. I just love the idea of these guys. Bohr would be out in the Danish countryside, marching along and dragging Heisenberg along with them and forcing him, and Einstein, and they'd just be, having these conversations. And I just love that image, and just think how fun it would have been to have been
Those
there.
were the days.
Those were the days, yeah.
And here, maybe you're summarizing their view, but you say quantum theory is a kind of triangulation in which complementary pairs of imperfect concepts, wave particle, position momentum, are used to home in as best we can on phenomena beyond the pale of the human nervous system. And I think that's kind of just the upshot, is that part of the upshot is that the texture of physical reality is just something we can't imagine.
Yeah. And why should we? There's no evolutionary advantage to understanding reality on that level, except getting tenure at the physics department, and I don't think probably evolution has had time to select for that, but yeah. And I remember now, this is coming back to me, that chapter. One thing that struck me is the story of the 10 blind men and the elephant.
Yeah.
And so basically quantum mechanics is telling us there's 10 blind men, but no elephant.
That is humbling. That's what I mean by intellectual humility.
Yeah. I'm all for it.
Let me ask you a little about Einstein. I don't know if you get into this in the book. I don't remember, but there's a couple of weird things about Einstein. One is you alluded to the possibility of a deterministic universe. I gather Einstein was deterministic. That's partly implied by the fact that he insisted that there was a hidden variable.
Right. He's just basically saying this seems like there's a lot of randomness and it's undeterministic, but that's because there's a bunch of little cogs here that
we haven't detected. We don't know enough.
Yeah, but and then later the cogs got pushed into other dimensions that had to be invented to, like the Kaluza-Klein theory was something where the first time they cooked up extra dimensions that conveniently can't be seen or detected, but where all this important stuff's going on in the background, so everything makes sense.
And did his determinism also flow, though, from kind of relativity, in the sense that he viewed time as a dimension fundamentally on par with the other three dimensions in some sense, right?
Yeah.
And he saw,
but yeah.
And the idea was you can travel. So when you're heading into the future, you're really traveling along a dimension in the sense that you are when you head north.
Yeah.
And just as when you head north, the place you're going to get to is already there.
Yeah. Right.
When you travel into the future, the place you're going to get to is kind of already there. Is that it? That because he's viewing time as basically exactly like the three spatial dimensions, is that related to his?
No, I think basically you can say that special and general relativity they're just beautifully, gloriously deterministic, and just this wonderful structure that's built on the foundation of classical Newtonian mechanics. Where we billiard balls and pool cues, but finding that the things that we thought were constants, like the speed at which time passes or the length of an object or its mass. These things all have to be flexible so we can accommodate the speed of light as being the one unchanging.
Now, speaking of light and weird stuff, do I have this right that supposedly...
I mean, it's the speed of information.
It's the fastest that information can travel.
Yeah, and basically, it's like, for a photon, if a photon kind of, leaves the Earth, say, or maybe makes more sense to say a photon leaves the sun, it hits the Earth and, takes, 8 minutes to get here. But, for the photon, since it's going at the speed of light, by definition, no time has really passed and it hasn't really traversed any space. It's literally like it's here and there at the same time.
Now, that's just too weird. Well, wait a second. It's not at the same time. Now it sounds like you're talking about entanglement. Yeah. We don't want to go there yet.
Yeah.
Wait, let me pause and try to wrap my mind around that. Okay, I failed. I'm done. You're saying there's a sense in which it hasn't traversed any time. Well, why isn't that true of everything that moves at even slower speeds?
Well, because it's the ultimate limit that can't be surpassed. So for example, let's say some slower moving particle leaves the sun and comes to the Earth, and depending on what speed it's going at, we're told that time will dilate by a certain predictable amount, and that its length will contract, its mass will increase. But if you're going, as it approaches the speed of light, which is the ultimate limit, so anything going at the speed of light means that time's dilated to zero, and length is dilated to zero, and its mass has become infinite, and it's one of these things that every time I think I sort of understand it.
Yeah. And I never get that thing in the science fiction movies where, you travel out into space fast enough and so age more slowly. The premise of Interstellar and Planet of the Apes. And
yeah. Really good. I just wanted to recommend to people watching this, one of the crispest explanations I've seen of this is right near the beginning of Brian Greene's first book. What was that called? The Elegant Universe. And there's this one section toward the beginning where he's describing, I think he's using a race car crossing Bonneville Flats or something. And I just recommend that people read it, because that's one of the things I've read where I suddenly got this aha moment when it makes sense. I described a few other things like this in an essay I wrote once for a volume about Einstein. And I think my essay was called The Books in the Basement. And I was talking about books that had just really made me come to the verge of understanding relativity, and then kind of bouncing back off again.
I'm looking to have my aha moment on relativity. It's common for physicists to say what Feynman said, which is that quantum physics, that people do understand relativity. We understand relativity. The human mind can grasp it, but the human mind can't grasp quantum physics. That's what Feynman said, and that's what people say. But my mind does not grasp relativity. And here's another thing.
Mine too, but that's because it's our fault. It's not relativity's fault.
I'm willing to accept responsibility. But one more thing on relativity.
At the same time, Feynman famously said nobody really understands quantum mechanics. We just use it and it works.
Right. He said there was never a time when nobody understood relativity.
Yeah.
But we are at a time when nobody understands quantum physics.
Yeah.
Now, but here's my question on one more weird relativity related thing. I gather the idea is, speaking of photons, that if light is moving past you, like I'm standing here, the light is moving past me, and the photons are moving past me at the speed of light, naturally enough. But if I start running in the same direction of the light and run super fast, that does not change the velocity of the photons relative to me even, right? Yeah. Isn't that the argument? That if I do, like if I have a stopwatch and I'm measuring how fast photons are going past me, if I start going faster than the speed of sound in the same direction of the light,
yeah, you can't.
That does not change how fast the photons are going past me.
No,
that doesn't make any sense.
You'll never catch up with the photon.
I know I'll never catch up, but that's not what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Isn't it claimed, and maybe I'm wrong about this, isn't it claimed that just the speed of the photon relative to me,
yeah,
even if I start running
186,000 miles per second,
right? Even if I start running right along with the light,
yeah.
I mean, look, if a guy is running past me at a certain speed,
yeah,
then if I start running in the same direction as him, even if I'm slower than him, his velocity relative to me will change by virtue of the fact that I'm now running in his direction.
Yeah.
But the same is not true of light, right?
Well, let's see. So, I mean, let's say you get faster and faster, so you almost approach the speed of light, and during this time, your clock will be running slower and slower as time dilates. You'll be approaching infinite mass, whatever that means. You will be approaching zero length.
Well, I was thinking, though, that there was this straightforward claim in relativity that light is just unlike other things in the sense I just described, that somehow magically the speed of the photons...
It's always going to be 186,000 miles per second from...
Yeah, relative to me, even if I'm in motion in the same direction as it.
Relative from any point in the universe, no matter how fast that point is moving and in what direction it's moving. Yeah. And I mean, light can go slower than 186,000 miles per,
it can?
When it's not going through a vacuum, the speed of light.
But that's different.
Is in a vacuum.
But I mean, it's just funny because in general, Einstein begins with the point that, remember, once you start moving in the same direction with things like macroscopic objects or animals or whatever, your perspective, their velocity relative to you changes. And he starts out with those kinds of thought experiments, but then at the very end, it's like, but light is not like this. Yeah. And it just seems that light, it just has such a weird status. It's like...
Yeah, but it makes sense that it would be light, because it's not just light, but it's the speed at which information can be propagated through the universe. So, and if you don't have an ultimate limit to that, you can't have causality. The old thing where you could travel so fast that you could get somewhere before an event happened, and then stop it from happening, and then that gets much more confusing than relativity.
Yeah, of course there's entanglement, but let's not get into that because that does not. I understand that that's not the same as information moving past the fast of light.
There has to be a limit to the speed of signaling, or you couldn't have before and after and cause and effect, and all these things that are important to our brains.
Okay, well, this is weird enough. So let's turn to your life, which I'm sure is less weird than this.
The level of my confusion. So.
And your life is clearer, no doubt. So I like I said, I've had a number of these conversations. I generally start out asking people what gives their life meaning.
Yeah. I don't. Wow. I mean, it's just the horror of the alternative.
Of it not having meaning.
I mean, do you have this philosophical view toward death where you think, I'll be remembered by my works and the people who knew me, and I will have had a good run. And then once the flame of consciousness is snuffed out, I won't know it anyway. That I never. But to me, that's just the most horrible thought, that suddenly your consciousness is snuffed out. Everything you did and everything you remembered from your point of view is gone. And it doesn't matter that people are going to remember and celebrate and mourn you. I mean, to me, that's just a horrifying thought.
Well, that's interesting because
nothing of not existing. There was this book of kind of connected essays that Julian Barnes wrote a few years ago called what was it called? It's got this really good title that has the word nothing in it. I've got to Google it here, so go talk. I mean,
okay.
Continue.
We're about to bring you some information about a book by Julian Barnes.
Oh, it's so good.
So stay tuned, because before long we can tell you not only what the book says, which we could do now, but what it's actually called.
Yeah,
and
the
George
title
will now take over.
Oh no, but the title is really what makes. Well, I mean, it's a great book, but the title is let's see.
I've never read a Julian. Why do I think of parrots when I think of Julian Barnes? Is there a reason for that?
Flaubert's Parrots.
Is that it?
Yeah, Flaubert's Parrot was.
I guessed it. That's so wonderful.
Oh, and he wrote this wonderful novel that's kind of.
I'm so impressed with myself.
You should be. And that's probably one of his best known. I think that's the one that put him on the map. And then a wonderful novel called Arthur and George, where Arthur is Arthur Conan Doyle. But here's the essays. It's called Nothing to be Frightened of. And it's all about death. And you can take this on two levels. One is, death, it's nothing to be frightened of. You know, it's part of the natural thing we pass on. And as you're reading, suddenly at some point you get this chilling thought that, what he's saying is there's nothing to be frightened of. There's just this zeroness out there.
So you should be frightened by the nothing.
No matter what you do, at some point, like that, and it's just gone. Everything you did and remembered and felt and enjoyed and all the meaning that you found in life disappears. And
now that's interesting that you say that, because one thing I've asked a number of people who don't believe in an afterlife is, well, how do you approach death? Is it hard approaching the prospect of death without an afterlife? And they almost always start talking about legacy. Yeah. The people I've influenced, the reassurance that the people I've influenced will carry on, the ideas I've clarified will remain clear, But you, apparently, assuming you don't believe in an afterlife, you are in a seriously grim situation, man.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the existential dilemma, right? It's, Woody Allen, with so many things, put it well, that, there's, is it Annie Hall? I can't remember which of his films it's in, but there's something where they're talking about immortality, and he's saying, I don't want this kind of immortality where people remember my works or read my books or watch my movies. I want immortality, like where you live forever. And, yeah.
It's funny, I don't think about death that much, except in the sense of it being an expiration date. Like I better get stuff done that I want to get done.
Yeah.
To be honest, I think this has to do maybe with my my Southern Baptist upbringing, because this is kind of a theme in some evangelical religions. I think that death is the laying down of burdens. There's almost a sense that there could be a kind of relief associated with it.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I've done my best. Now, of course, in the Southern Baptist version, it's like, okay, I've done my best. Now you can carry me to heaven, Jesus.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I guess my feeling is, okay, I've done my best, and I guess that's it.
Yeah. Well, I think certainly if in the last part of your life you're very sick and suffering, and that amplifies it. But I mean, I think the saving grace as you get older, it's just that your brain starts, shutting down, incrementally. So, if you get old enough before you die, you're probably not fully cognizant of just how horrible the thing it is that the next second it's just going to be like, snuffing out a candle flame and you're gone.
George, you're bringing me down, man.
I don't want to give the impression that I, spend a lot of time, obsessed about this. It's just that every once in a while it'll strike me and I'll get this chill at that there's nothing out there to be afraid of.
See, what I dread is actually not death. It's like extreme old age. Of course, my definition of extreme old age will continue to recede, and I'll always think.
Believe me.
I'll always think, okay, it's worth living now, but I'll tell you, a year from now.
No.
That's actually what I, the point where it's really hard to be very productive, career-wise, and there's so many aches and pains, and
but boy, we considered against not existing.
There's nothing painful about not existing. There's no evidence that there's anything unpleasant about not existing.
Well, no, I mean that's the paradox. But I mean, I guess it's the horror, right that millisecond before the non-existence starts, and that just makes it worse.
Right, that's the only problem. The rest is just like when you're asleep and not dreaming, which so far as I know is fine. I have no reason to think it's anything other than fine.
Yeah, except that you wake up.
You do wake up, which on some days is not a great thing. Yeah. Look at it that way.
God, wouldn't it be great if there really is an afterlife?
Totally. Like if we ran into each other and could joke
Yeah,
about this conversation,
yeah.
like boy, were we confused.
Well, and it would be great if everybody got to participate. It wasn't like,
What would you want heaven to be like?
oh, I pretty much, I'd be okay if it were pretty much like my life is now. I like my life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Heaven would be Santa Fe.
Yeah, I'd live in Santa Fe. I'd write books. I'd write my column for the Times. Like this morning, I went hiking up in the mountains by here with some friends, and came back to do a conversation with Robert Wright on Skype. And
Lucky you. What a rich life you have.
yeah. I mean, it's And then I just had an interesting trip to Argentina for an article I'm writing for Wired, and just getting to have this perch in life where you get to explore things and get a little money for writing about them. And
well, you should be thankful for that these days. That's not as easy to do as it used to be.
No. I mean, sometimes when I think, I used to be on staff at the Times, and I left for the freedom of moving to Santa Fe, and it's worked out well. But sometimes I think, my God, what was I thinking? If I'd stayed, and now I'd get this big chunk of money for, letting them buy out my pension. Then again, I probably wouldn't have written all 9 of the books I've written. They're pretty hard to write when you're working.
It is. It's a tough trade-off. Although, not that you're not working when you're writing books, but we know what you mean.
Yeah.
So I guess when you talk about what heaven would be like, you're talking about what things give your life meaning now.
Yeah, and whatever that is.
Do you think about that at all, or do you have a definition of meaning, or does it just?
I mean,
it's
it's just this wonderfully weird thing that we're alive, and we have no idea why or whether it means, and who does it mean something to if you're going to die anyway. I mean, the great meaner in the sky who means us into existence. And I mean, to me, it's just more like, like I appreciate the stuff I enjoy, like hiking or going for walks or reading a good book or eating a good meal, having good friends, things like that. So,
mm-hmm. But I guess
simple stuff.
There's a temptation, at least for me, and I think for many people, to distinguish between things that give life meaning and things that are merely pleasurable but don't quite rise to the level of giving life meaning. But maybe that's a totally false.
I mean, there's moments of epiphany are wonderful. How they're few and far between, but sometimes, like again, I go back to hiking and being up in the mountains, especially at a high altitude, and then suddenly getting to the top of a ridge and looking out over this vista. I mean, that you can really just get this wonderful epiphanic, is that an adjective? A thrill of epiphany.
Could be.
And or looking, like an incredibly dark sky. I remember one night when I was staying at this, it's an archaeological research place in southern Arizona, and it was the darkest sky I've ever seen in my life. And walked out of this little cabin where I was staying, and just suddenly I was the stars were just so intense and so many of them, and like nothing I'd ever seen. It was just like, wow.
Well, and doesn't it deepen it to know what they actually are? I mean, when you look at the Milky Way and realize that what you're doing is viewing your own galaxy, through kind of a slice of your galaxy, basically.
Yeah.
And that's a bunch of stars, and then the number of galaxies.
Oh. Okay.
It's just like.
Oh yeah, it's like you could really. I mean, it's. Wow.
And this is kind of a distinction maybe that was hovering over the early part of this conversation, okay? One thing you hear people say a lot who are, well, Richard Dawkins says this, he says, I have my religion, it's wonder. And usually I think when people say that, or people like Richard Dawkins, Lawrence Krauss, they mean the wonder at what science has taught us. In other words, how amazing some things we now know are, including like how many galaxies there are, the wonder at that. But there's a separate kind of wonder that we were hinting at early. It's wonder at the things that just don't make any damn sense.
Wonder what we
it's like, what is this wave particle thing? What is the relationship of consciousness to what we think of as physical reality?
Yeah.
To me, those things almost give me like the chills. To me, that is closer to what the feeling of awe that is sometimes associated by anthropologists with so-called primitive religion, and said by some of them to be, because originally the idea of awe had a strong connotation of kind of terror and fear in the presence of overwhelming power.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, maybe what I just said is not quite right, but anyway.
With the inability to tear yourself away because it's just so frightening and compelling. But no, I mean, to me, the same thing. It's not so much thinking, we know this is, this galaxy, part of this galactic system, and then there's this one over there, and general relativity and gravitational lensing, but just the thought of beyond that kind of crumbling edge of reality where our minds really can't go, and just what, maybe it is like, what does it all mean, and knowing that we'll never know what it all means, or what meaning means, and all of that. I mean, that to me is just, it's just really awesome.
But I can't stop talking about it and thinking about it. And one of the frustrations of old age is that your thinking is not getting clearer.
No.
It's I think, man, if you wanted to understand relativity, you really should have spent the time in your 20s, right? Because your analytical mind is more acute.
That's probably true. And there's also this point where you kind of, no matter how much stuff you've read about that, or a lot of other things like, say, deconstructionist literary theory, that, there's just like a limit to which you're not going to...
Exactly. That is my great regret. I guess there are a number of regrets about getting old and dying, including the getting old and dying.
Yeah.
But there are so many realms of knowledge, even the ones that I suspect are maybe less worthwhile than some others. Like, I suspect if I looked deeply, deeply into postmodernism, I would think half of this is a total crock. But I would still like to know. I would still like to just be conversant and just test out the ideas in my own mind. And you just don't have time to do it all.
Yeah, no, it's true. And then they're just kind of, it's just such little things here and there we can dip into. And
let me ask you, speaking of postmodernism, let's get back to your book.
Yeah,
there is now.
It's modern.
Is it now? There is. You're at least trotting out, whether or not you buy into it yourself. You're trotting out the prospect that we should be skeptical of scientific knowledge in some kind of almost a fundamental way or a deep way. And you. Well, maybe you tell me. I'll say this, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But you do a lot of juxtaposing of science with religion, and you draw on kind of some indigenous religions in your area, as well as some Christian stuff in your area, as I recall. But you're doing a kind of a science religion juxtaposition and making the point that, look, both of them are attempts to, in a certain sense, impose order on the world. How privileged really is the status of science? You get into these questions. Why don't you tell me how much of what I said was wrong, and in any event, tell us what you actually believe.
That's all right. I mean, I think that what I was trying to do in the book is, at the same time I'm celebrating science, is to make people a little more skeptical and to think about how we know what we think we know, and how solid is it really. Like when we measure great distances in the universe, and basically it's one theory stacked up on top of another theory, and I compare it to a house of cards. And is it a house of cards where someday something might knock out one of the foundation cards and it'll all collapse, and it'll turn out that the universe is like vastly smaller? There was that cosmologist Halton Arp, who basically thought that we got it wrong and everything was much closer and smaller than it really is. And things like that fascinate me. And then just the idea of bringing in religion, somebody who doesn't have a religious bone in his body, was kind of, I was fascinated. I'd come back to New Mexico in the early 90s and was driving around northern New Mexico, and I was up at Los Alamos National Labs, which is in this beautiful setting up in the Jemez Mountains, and then driving down back towards Santa Fe and going by the San Ildefonso Indian Pueblo, or Tewa Indian Pueblo, kind of, ancestors of the Anasazi, and then going to this new place then called the Santa Fe Institute, where they're studying something called complexity. And it suddenly occurred to me that, wow, this would be a great kind of a literary canvas to talk about this whole question of how we know what we know, and are we discovering science or making it up? Is mathematics like discovering new mathematics and new laws? Is it like miners excavating existing veins of ore, or is it more like improvisational jazz? And
what's the answer?
I mean, basically, I don't answer the question that I pose, but I just kind of marvel and puzzle through it. And, I mean, I think anyone reading the book would see that I'm basically, I think what I'm saying is that, like, science and religion all springs from the same human compulsion to find order in the world or to impose it when it's not there. But that science, along with doing that, has built in all of these kinds of safeguards and methodologies that make it less likely that we're going to fool ourselves, at least in the long term. And that it has reality testing where like Tewa cosmology does not have that. Or I also talk about the belief system of the sect of penitent Catholics, the penitentes, who live in some of the high mountain villages north of here in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the Blood of Christ Mountains. And of course, they have their own whole mental world and order and structure. So I kind of just use this as a way to play with these ideas, and then to keep coming back to this sense that our brains basically evolved, to see cause and effect, because it's a very big advantage for survival. But, it's easy, it keeps working even when there's nothing there to report on.
Yeah, and I mean, as David Hume pointed out, we never know for sure. All we know for sure is that certain events reliably follow other events. We don't know that there's this thing called causality that's actually there. Because, I mean, after all, when you watch a movie again and again, you also see certain events follow other events. But it's not because one part of the movie is actually causing another part. So you said you don't have a religious bone in your body, so you were not brought up religiously, or? No,
I mean, I very, very dilute Protestant. There was a Methodist church we went to, not terribly frequently, I don't think, when I was growing up in Albuquerque, and mostly I remember that the kids would have to go sit in Sunday school, which was just excruciating, while the adults went to church. And later, I guess I got old enough that I got to go to church with my parents, and I just found it all just very, very boring and tedious. And actually, when I was in the 6th grade, I had some occasion, I think it might have been a contest, to write a short story. And I wrote a fictional short story of a little boy, much like myself, who goes to Sunday school and then starts questioning what the Sunday school teacher's telling him, and ends up going into this big atheistic diatribe, and then it sort of ends with the celebration of science and medicine, and how this is.
How did your teacher respond to that? Do you recall?
Actually, I didn't win the contest, but I remember my one teacher, Mrs. Adams, her name was, later told me that she thought it was the best story in the contest, but for obvious reasons it didn't win. So,
was she candid about the fact that an atheist story couldn't win the contest?
Yeah, well, I think after the fact, as I remember it. And I mean, she said,
that's funny.
She said, this is really great. She thought I'd done something rather radical and creative for however old you are in 6th grade, but wasn't going to get the prize. I probably wasn't that good anyway, but the others probably weren't either.
Yeah, no, I don't see that story winning a big prize at a public school in Albuquerque at that particular point in time. It would have a slightly better shot now, I think.
Yeah, right. That's probably true. Yeah.
Well, George, thank you for. Speaking of opening up, thanks for opening up, talking about your life. And
that was really fun and interesting.
And I'm delighted to hear that there's a brand new 20th anniversary edition of this book, Fire in the Mind, which people should run out and buy, Science, Faith, and the Search for Order. originally published by the highly prestigious Knopf, and the 20th anniversary is out via the basically the paperback imprint, more or less, of Knopf, of the whole Random House empire, whatever that empire is called now, vintage.
It's
the vintage paperback.
It's subsumed. And,
yeah. So thank you, and I guess people will next see or hear you in conversation with John Horgan on science faction.
Yeah, we have to catch up. We haven't done one for a while, so.
Well, I hope that my wish is your command. I'd love to see it.
It's always fun. We're happy to have the opportunity.
Yeah, well, people love it. Well, take care, George. Don't think too much about death, okay?
Okay, John. Okay, Bob. I always called you John. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would not be. I would be honored. I would be honored. I have the highest regard for John.
It is an honor either way. So
yeah.
I'll call him.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.